This is our third wonderful day with Peter Wolf, and he was just saying that he was been kind of impressed by
Very
the number
impressed.
of people
Yeah.
coming out to the sessions this week. So
Yeah.
I know that many of you have been either at the town hall on Tuesday or at the session on developing program level learning outcomes yesterday, and so most of you are familiar with Peter. So at Peter's request, I am simply saying, here's Peter. Wolf.
I'm Peter.
He's he's fantastic. Enjoy the
It's all in the hairline.
the next,
Yeah.
the next hour and a half. Thanks for coming
They don't
out.
know salsa dancing.
Oh, we will be practicing. Hello. I have to say I'm really excited to see all of you here. I don't think I do a lot of these kinds of workshops and presentations at other universities and colleges, and I don't think I've seen such enthusiastic engagement. And I really congratulate you on that. I think that's something to be really proud of. And I know you're at the beginning of this project, but the fact that so many of you are giving it some serious consideration and trying to figure out how to make it work and what to make work and what to not to make work, I think is really impressive. And so I'm very impressed with TRU. Congratulations. It's really, I think you're off to a great start. Just a little bit about me. I'm Peter. I'm from the University of Guelph. We started doing, and I'm the equivalent of Gary Hunt at our university. So our teaching center looks after educational development and curriculum, also looks after educational technology, distance ed, continuing ed, and ESL. So we have quite a big portfolio. But I would say one of the biggest impact work that we've done, uh-oh. Uh-oh. One of the biggest, the highest impact work we've done is around curriculum. We talk to, in doing curriculum work, you're talking to almost every faculty, you're representing almost every student and other stakeholders, and it engages people in ways that I haven't seen. Not easy engagement, but deep engagement. And so I think for us, it's really turned out to be a really good experience. Not an easy experience, and not without its complications and issues around resources and time and effort that this does take. But it's really worked out well for us, and I think our programs are starting to feel more confident in what they can say that the students will get out of it, and with some assurance that they actually might. And so I think that's what we're trying to hope for. What we're going to do today is, although I will be covering a little bit of what we talked about over the last couple of days, I thought it would be a really good idea to do a case study, to actually do a simulation. So the last couple of weeks I've made one up. So we're going to try it out today, and you'll let me know whether it goes well and if I should use it again or whether I should throw it away. But I think the idea is we wanted to take you through the whole process. The process we're going to take you through, by we I mean me, the process we're going to take you through today would be equivalent to about a year. It takes us about a year to work through what we're going to work through today. A year of consistent, regular effort. We're going to try to do in an hour and a half. Ready? So here we go. Just in terms of our workshop goals, we really want to identify ways that we can foster engaged curriculum development. And we really want to try to get as many of our stakeholders involved as sustainable and as feasible, and we'll talk about how to do that. I have a couple of flip charts here. I thought as we go through each section of the simulation, we might try to capture some of the principles or lessons learned, and if we have any resources that have come up, we can capture them, so we begin to develop our own list of principles around curriculum development and maybe some tools or resources that might be useful. So I'll just jot that down as we come. So, ready? Does this sound good? All right, we're ready to go. So can I get some help handing stuff out? Here is your case study. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to read it, to talk about it, and to answer the question, what do you do now? You are the facilitator for this curriculum project. You've been approached by a department. Are we good here? Do we have enough? Uh-oh. Hey, Marlene. I don't know if we have one for everybody. There are more people than we anticipated, I think.
I made 40.
We have 40 copies, so there may be some extras from table to table. If not, maybe you can share. Thanks, Gary. Thanks. Who needs one?
Another spare if you need it.
Great, thank you very much. Here's a couple. Oh, I'm so sorry, we don't have a room. All right, take about 10 minutes, and 5-10 minutes, and let's read it, and you can talk about within your group, what would you do if you were in this situation? All right, okay, third warning. Here we go. That's the third one. Love to hear the discussion, but let's bring it back. So all that buzz in the room, and I'm curious to know some of the things, some of the discussions you had, and what you would recommend is kind of the next step. So what were you just talking about at your table? Yes.
Establishing broad program outcomes, introducing an introductory course into the program, and so it doesn't matter whether you start in first year or third year, wherever you enter the program, then you take the introductory course that will give you a sense of what you're in for, and the adoption of a cohort model.
Oh, interesting. Great. Thank you very much. Yes.
My esteemed colleagues here came up with the notion that there does seem to be a sense that these problems may not be problems because it says there is a sense in the curriculum committee. So we may be chasing our tail here and not actually getting at the real issue.
Right. So what would your first step be then?
Well, what we kicked about in those couple of minutes was likely some kind of focus group or survey of students and also faculty to see if we can get a better focus on the real issue.
Before we start to solve it, to figure out really what the issue
There's
is.
another one here about, I think students entering third year will have foundational threshold concept, maybe just in the evaluation of their testing scores and things like that, we might be able to see that they're really not achieving some of the levels that we're anticipating.
So using some sort of combined, looking at a number of different grades or assignments over a number of courses. Great. What else? What were some of the other ideas? Was that pretty much what you came up with? Yeah?
We talked a little bit about maybe the lack of communication at the last point, and that it might be worthwhile to communicate about what the goals of the program were originally and whether they're still meeting that, and maybe a mapping of the courses to see where they interconnect and which ones are working or not.
You have a thumbs up from the table behind you. You got a big 2 thumbs up. Wow, they like that one. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Sure. We also were looking at the curriculum committee doesn't have time and effort, so to get them together to actually gather evidence as to what's going on, and do a needs assessment of what they feel is lacking.
We're all on the right track, I'm happy to say. What we would do in this situation, is look at program outcomes to start. Either revisit them or develop them if they don't exist. Let me talk a little bit about how we do that. Getting a group of 20, 30, 50, 80 faculty together to talk about coming up with a consensus around program outcomes can be quite a challenge. And so what we do is we've adapted the consensus building process a little bit, in that typically what we'll do is we'll work with the curriculum committee to develop a draft list of program outcomes, at which point we will put that on an online survey that goes out to faculty, asking them agree, disagree, giving the context, agree, disagree, what's missing, what they think is critical. We'll gather that data back at the curriculum committee, and what we often find is there's already agreement on 80% of them. So that when we get together for that meeting, we only have to talk about 4, not 20. That becomes much more manageable. So we always try to collect the data before we go into the meetings, so that the meetings are based on information and we have some results to show and we narrow down what we actually have to talk about. Typically, most faculty will agree and most students will agree, critical thinking, communication skills, and those kinds of things. There isn't that much controversy. But if you try to talk about each of one of those 20 in an hour and a half faculty meeting, you're probably not going to get through them, and it's going to be quite onerous. But if you only have 4 to talk about, because that's where the controversies sit, or here's the ones that were listed that we're missing, it's a much more truncated discussion. And you already have agreement on 10 of them, or 8 of them, or however many that everyone's agreed on. So even if you don't get agreement on all the other ones, you can start on those core. Again, I think part of the role of the facilitator is to keep things moving. And I'm going to suggest that that's principle number 1, is use a facilitator. I'll give the first one. Why do you think we suggest using a facilitator for this process? What's that?
It's neutral.
Neutral. It's exactly right. Having someone who doesn't have a perceived bias around the discipline, about what it should be, what it should do, is really helpful, especially in those departments where there may be some differences of opinion and some philosophical differences. It's really important to have, I think, we've found that that's where the great success is. There are a few departments who've been able to do this on their own without an external facilitator, but those are really exceptional departments with a key champion who has good facilitation skills. So it happens, but not all that often. So when you're looking forward, one of the things you might want to do is to think about how you develop those facilitators. Do they come from the teaching centers at Gary Hunt, or do we kind of build capacity amongst all of the programs and then do each other's? So, and that really depends on the way TRU ends up going and resourcing this kind of activity. But that's a really, we found that if faculty do it for their own departments, it stops for the most part. Just because of those long-term relationships, philosophical differences, diversity within the department, all those good things, but they can make it quite difficult to develop program outcomes. So, let me give you the program outcomes. They're here. They did it. They worked it through. They did it. So let me give you, can I get some help handing these out a little? So they did it. I'll do it. I'll just run around. I don't mind running. Here we go. I don't think that's enough. Let me give you some more. Oops. There you go. Little bits of paper for everybody. If you have extras or not enough, let me know. And here you go. You have too many for sure. Save too many for the end. No, there's not enough.
There might be enough.
You good? Okay.
Do you have one more?
Yes.
Thank you.
Anybody missing? I've got a couple extra. So in developing the program outcomes, here are some of the resources we use. By the way, just language. There's a technical difference to people like me between objective and outcome and competency and indicators. I think for this purpose, it doesn't matter. Whatever language your discipline uses is fine. But these are the kind of synonyms often used around outcomes. So it depends on the language, but when we were working, say, with the engineers, I used all of this language, including the word attributes, which is a new one they introduced. Graduate attributes is what engineering calls their program outcomes. So there's lots of language around it. Don't get too caught up in the language. It's all around what will the students be able to know, do, and value by the end of the program that they couldn't do before they came in. That's really the question that we're asking. One of the places we'll look, or a number of the places we'll look, if you have university learning outcomes, if there are existing program outcomes that might have existed when the program was proposed but haven't really been revisited in a number of years or in a long time. obviously professional associations or accrediting bodies if they exist. And it's also really worth doing a bit of an environmental scan around other programs that you think are really good, similar to yours, or ones that you don't think are good. And take a look and see what they're doing and how they're doing it. The most important part of the program outcomes, in my perspective, is the disciplinary norms and language. When you look at university outcomes, critical thinking, sure, that means something, but it means more when you put it into the context of an economics department or a biology department. And what does critical thinking look like in that context? We want to make this as meaningful and as specific as possible. Usually the bigger outcomes, university outcomes, are really just an umbrella, context for us to consider. And it's really at the program level that the rubber hits the road and it makes sense to students and faculty in very concrete ways. Usually we try to keep it to about 7 to 15 outcomes. Remember, we're going to have to measure all of these. So make it manageable. I've seen lists of 40 outcomes and I cringe. When I see 3, I wonder about the depth. So there's some, you're going to have to figure that out, but there's some, I've seen kind of 7 to 15 or 20. That's getting a little high in my opinion, but 15 it seems to be pretty good. And so we'll take a look at those frameworks. And this is the another important piece of this is I worry a little bit about learning outcomes and this whole movement having the potential to homogenize our programs. That we all end up with some variation of the same 10 outcomes between programs in different schools. And it has that potential. We are trying to provide kind of a consistency around that, but I think what's critical is if you stop at what's common to everybody, I think you end up looking like everybody else. If you then go the next step and articulate what's unique about your program, why students come to TRU as opposed to anywhere else for the same course of study. What's unique about your areas of research? What's unique about the characteristics of your program? What's unique about your educational experiences that you've built in about them? Whatever those things are that are unique, that you consider unique to TRU or unique to your particular program, that's what you want. You want to make sure to build that in. Otherwise, we end up making all the programs look similar. And I don't think we want to do that. We want to articulate what's special about ours, what's unique about ours. Okay? Just in terms of context, we take a look at different levels of outcomes in Ontario. The province has decided that these 6 outcomes, or degree level expectations, in other language, expectations, that's why don't worry too much about all these languages, decided that these are the 6 essential ingredients to any bachelor's out of Ontario. They all have definitions and further articulation, and there's the reference down there if you want to take a look. All of the schools' quality assurance processes are going to be linked eventually to be able to account for these within each program. But again, most programs aren't going to focus at this level. They're going to focus on the program outcome level and assess that. And I'll show you how that they all fit together. Here's our University of Guelph learning objectives. They just got approved this spring, brand new. Each one of them also has a rubric associated with it. So programs can use that to begin to measure and evidence what their students are doing. Again, this is quite valuable, but still quite broad. It still doesn't have a lot of meaning in terms of how that looks to a scientist versus how that looks to a theater arts student. They're certainly both going to be communicating, but what that looks like is going to be very different. And that's what we want to capture. And so just to give you a bit of an example, for those of you who have been in the last couple of days, you would have seen this one already, but I think it's a really good one. This is a program on our campus that we started 6-7 years ago that has no major, 2 minors, one in the arts, one in the sciences. There are only 6 core courses in the whole program, 2 in the first year, 2 in the second, 1 and 1. The rest are all taken in the minors, and they could be anywhere. So you can imagine the diversity of combinations that students have put together. And yet there still is a program And there still is a goal for this the goals for the program. And so we sat down with the physicists and the philosophers and the biologists and whoever was teaching in the program at that time and figured out what is it that's unique about this program. And that is the integration of diverse protocols. That's doing traditional and electronic research in both contexts with an equal balance. That's moderately unique in our school. There were a bunch of other ones as well, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of them. This is where we're trying to get to. This all of a sudden makes sense to most faculty, to most students. And so what we've actually done is kind of create an embedded outcomes approach. So this is a poli-sci example. So imagine a course objective that then feeds into program outcome, that then feeds into the university outcome, then feeds into, in our case, the provincial outcomes. It's a nice Russian doll kind of approach. What we're doing is evidencing here. As long as we've linked to the ones above and we know that an ethical practitioner fits into ethical behavior at the university and autonomy and professional capacity at the provincial level, all we have to do is focus here. Does that make sense? And then when we're reporting, we have to account to these. But that's a simple accounting. Any questions? So let me ask you, what principles, what resources, anything here we should be adding to the list? We talked about using a facilitator. Anything else that we should be adding to our principles or resources list at this point? We'll put down neutral. I think that was the word that we talked about. Anything else? Yeah.
Well, do you want to add collect data, be informed, operate on a informed level?
Absolutely. We don't go into a meeting without having the data beforehand, because we find that those conversations around curriculum can get stuck quite easily. And so we really try to do a lot of prep, a lot of data collection, a lot of honing of what we're going to do when we talk with faculty and with students so that it's targeted, focused, and we keep moving. I think one of the rules, the principles for a facilitator is kind of keep it moving. You know, this gets stuck for too long and people don't come out of their offices again.
This may be idealistic, but working toward consensus, is that part of the
Yep.
approach?
Sorry, this is why I like PowerPoint. It's this handwriting right here that drove me to PowerPoint. Yes, Marlene.
Where in that layer that you have is accreditation boards and the accreditation kinds of outcomes?
Yeah, typically they'll be equivalent to here. So
Are
if
you
you,
working with those first and then working down, or are you working up? Because sometimes the university, like, what faculty would like for a degree in an accreditation program may not necessarily be what the accreditation program is asking for.
and that's an interesting, that's also a philosophical stance.
Right.
You know, our nutrition department, for example, Marlene, teaches to their professional accreditation. Our veterinary school does not. They check to make sure that enough students are doing well on their board exams, but they say we're not teaching to practice, we're teaching professionals veterinary practices, and they don't tie it to accreditation. So it really depends philosophically on what that department is doing around accreditation. Quite interesting that our veterinary school does not look at that and does not tie themselves to the board exams at all. Yet the students do very well on it. So it really depends, but I would say that kind of fits in right about here. And in terms of the bottom up or top down, we strongly recommend bottom up. In many colleges, you'll almost work top down, where you'll develop the outcomes, you'll develop the courses, you'll develop the course outlines, and then you'll give them to instructors to adapt and to use. I think, and those all have the outcomes embedded on them, and it's very organized and structured. It's a little messier when you do it from faculty, but you get much more engagement and much more involvement and much more connection to the curriculum. And we'll talk about that next. There was another hand up somewhere, no? Anything else we should capture here? Yeah. What do you mean by that in this context?
Keeping the best interest of the student in mind when you're looking at developing a learning outcome?
I did everything but hear you. Can you say that again?
Keeping the best interest of the student in mind when you're developing your.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with that. Now, this is nitpicky, but what we found is that the word student-centered sometimes leaves faculty with a bad feeling, that we're trying to make it easy for students. That's how it's sometimes interpreted. I've heard that interpreted like that. That student-centered means we make it easy for students, and why would we want to do that? So what we've done is we've replaced the word students with learning. Just, again, it's a small twist, but I think from an acceptance standpoint, learning-centered is a much more acceptable language and has different assumptions behind it that don't lead it to make it easy for students.
So what are the general assumptions behind the learning centered?
Let me ask you, what do you think some of the assumptions behind learning-centeredness is? What would you say?
You looked at it yesterday when you mapped out where your courses lie. If you've got 15 papers all due at one point, then the learning is not there, right?
Yeah.
They're just cramming to try and get it done.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Sometimes it's over-focusing in a particular area. Sometimes it's under-focusing on a particular area. Sometimes we talk about covering content as opposed to learning content. So there's lots of assumptions behind it. I don't think it's that different from student-centered. I think it's just a language that becomes a little bit easier. And certainly for me, philosophically, I don't put the students at the center. I put the learning at the center. And the students and the faculty and the resources and the support are all kind of circling around that.
Well, it makes it more process-oriented.
Yes. Oh, thank you.
So it might involve also your teaching strategies
Absolutely.
around different learning styles.
Absolutely.
Your students.
Yeah.
And it's more results-oriented. Yeah, you can test whether something's been learned.
Fair enough. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to take that. That's the reason I like Learning Center, because you can actually, it does. I think you're right. That's interesting. Thank you. You're helping me work out arguments. This is awesome. Because this is my own personal little piece that I've just seen people, faculty back up at student-centered, saying, well, I'm not here to make it easy for the students. Yeah.
Question, within our discipline nursing, we always involve our students and our stakeholders as we are developing right from the very beginning. To what degree do you see that as a key principle that student stakeholders are pulled in at like early stages as opposed to just?
Well, why don't we move on with the case study and we'll see where we get to. Thank you for the segue. So, I guess the next question is, once we have our program outcomes, once we are beginning to identify what we're trying to do in the program, the next question we're going to ask is, where in the curriculum are students being provided the opportunity to develop, to learn these knowledge, skills, and outcomes, these program outcomes? So we actually go into mapping. It's part of the data collection. So let me show you, because most of you haven't been involved in this, I won't make you do that part, so I'll just show you this a little bit. We use two different types of maps. Some of you will be aware of this already, but I just wanted to make sure this is where it really comes into play. We've got the context of our case, we've got the program outcomes, we've all agreed on that. Now we need to find out where we were providing opportunities intentionally for students to develop those. And so we have two different types of maps that uncover two different kinds of things. One of them is called what we call a course progression map. Not a very elegant name, but it describes it pretty well. Very easy to do. It's all based on what courses, semester by semester, are students taking. And you end up with something that looks like this. I know you can't see it, but you're not supposed to. Semester 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Each box is a course. The green boxes are the core courses taught by the department. The other colored boxes are core courses taught by other departments. And the blank spaces are electives. We do this for every one of our programs. It's really helpful because what sometimes happens is that in the work of a curriculum, you use a curriculum committee structure, is that how you, yeah? Okay. So when a lot of times curriculum committees are dealing with course additions, course deletions, course changes, and there's often not a sense of standing back and looking at the impact of that. One example I brought up yesterday was we did a curriculum assessment and the students were complaining of burnout halfway through the program. When we looked at the structure, the middle of the program was totally jammed with required and heavy courses. And that wasn't done intentionally. Just everyone thought their courses should be around third or fourth year. And so they put it in. And that's just what ended up evolving. So this just gives you a chance to take a step back and look at the structure. One of the things that became clear in this particular department as well was that they had no idea what was taught in these prerequisites. It had been years since anybody looked into it. And as a matter of fact, looking at this structure, they went, oh, what's this first year is kind of taken up by other programs. We should find out what's going on. And they actually eliminated one of the courses because it had changed over the years and had nothing to do with their program anymore. But it's still been a prerequisite for years. Sound familiar? I see some heads nodding. It happens. Some of our issues around curriculum have nothing to do with learning. It's structure. So this is one of the things that we look at. It's quite easy to do. We're now trying to figure out how to automatically generate them from our registrarial system, but now we're manually using them. And we're using a software, and I'll write this down for you. It's called VUE. And it's out of Tufts University. And it's a free program, mind mapping program, that we thought was quite useful for us to start with. VUE, Virtual Understanding Environment, I think it stands for. 3 random words. Not really. The other map is much more involved. And that's where we're looking at program outcomes mapping. You can also call it intentions mapping. You can also call it whatever you want. And what we're trying to do here now that we have solidly agreed upon program outcomes, now we want to ask faculty, and this goes to Marlene's question earlier, do we do this from the top down and say, now your course will? Or do we do it from the bottom up and say, does your course? We do it from the bottom up. I don't think that our culture at Guelph would accept that top down very well at all. But what's really interesting is that I found this work so rejuvenating because I think that faculty really care about their courses and their students, but not always do they feel in control of what goes on outside of their course. And the opportunities to get together and find out what's going on between courses is very rare. And so we're trying to do that by collecting that data in advance. So we do that using an online survey. We started with Excel spreadsheet and walking it around. Then we went to SurveyMonkey, and now we've developed our own internal software as we get more deep into that. And what we ask each faculty for each course, it takes about 20 minutes a survey to fill out. We ask them generally, what are the instructional methods, what are the assessment approaches? Then for each program outcome of those 20 or so listed by this particular program that we're looking at, how many or which ones do you think your course helps to foster? And let's say you pick 5 of them. Then we'll ask for each of those 5, do you teach it? Do you assess it? Or do you assume it? And what level of sophistication? We have an assumption that 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, that there's a development happening from first to fourth year. We want to begin to get a sense of whether we're matching that along those 4 years from course to course. Good questions to ask. And then we ask another structural question around when are your assignments due and how much are they worth. Because we find that that has, over a little bit of experience, we found that that has a big impact, the flow of the student of effort and grading and assignments. So let me show you some results from this particular one. Again, some of you might have seen this over the last couple of days, but let me just, I'll go through it quickly just so you can see it. Research methods was one department's, one of their priority program outcomes. They had it written out in proper language, but for the slide's sake, it's just called research methods. We asked, of those who think that their course fosters research, how do you teach it? And how do you assess it? This is exactly the kind of data we would bring back to a department and ask, is that right? We're not going to say it's not right, because I don't know. It's really hard for me to know what are the questions in the exam, and maybe they are real research. Maybe it is really engagement in research, so it's hard to tell from the methodology, but it certainly brings up some questions to me about alignment between outcome, learning approach, instructional approach, and assessment approach. And it's interesting that we decide we want students to be able to engage in research, and we teach them to do it via lecture, and we check whether they can do it via test. It does kind of make your head go, is that right? And I don't know whether it is or not. As a facilitator, I wouldn't go in and say, my interpretation is you've got to change all of this. But what we would do is go, here's the data that comes directly from you. It brought some questions to my mind, let's talk about that. And that's the discussion that then takes place in a face-to-face environment. We've collected the data, we've gotten a real sense of what we believe and what we think is happening. This is intention. We don't know if this is actually where the students are learning it, but this is where we intend for them to learn it. What do you think? One of the other interesting slides, I don't have it here, around the flow of the grades is, you can imagine, how long is your semester here? 13 weeks, and then you have a final exam period, which we're in now, right? Ours is 12 weeks. And it's really interesting, and not surprising at all, but really interesting to see nothing week 1 and 2, something week 3, a big bump week 6, maybe a couple of things week 8, maybe 1 or 2 things week 12, and then a bunch in week 13 for us. Almost consistently across. And to some extent that may be unavoidable, but it does bring up the question in a retreat, in a discussion with faculty around, is there a way to smooth that out a little bit? Because one of the principles of learning centeredness is time and effort with content. And so what we want to do is have students engage with the content regularly over 12 weeks, not episodically when the assignments are due. And one of the main motivators for students to engage is graded work. And so if we can take that one essay and break that down into a proposal, an intro, and have those submitted in bits and pieces and then resubmitted as a whole at the end, they get to rewrite, it evens out, things like that, techniques like that can work really well. There'll always be those kinds of peaks and valleys. I think it's unavoidable to some extent, but I think giving some thought to how we can make sure that effort is given across 12 weeks, not episodically, and not in such high peaks where we're not going to see the best of student effort. So, any questions about mapping? Yes, we have one. Yes, Marlene.
Okay, sorry.
No, good.
Sorry, Peter, one more. Okay, I like this because, again, you're taking the evaluation and tying it to the program outcomes. My concern about this is that you haven't, what I don't see happening is taking the learning outcomes from each of the weekly modules or what you're teaching for the week. You should have the learning objectives and your program outcomes, right? So tying those first and then tying the assessments. I just don't see, there's a step missing to me.
Okay, so there's 2 ways to deal with that. A lot of our courses have learning outcomes now, but what we'll often do, especially in departments where they're not really rigorous and not really coordinated, what we'll do is everybody here who said my course fosters research has essentially raised their hand and said this interests me in my course. What we'll often do is take these 15 people or 9 people or however many there are afterwards and put them in a room together, and let's now break it down into the micro. So we do get to that, but not in the big group. Because again, that's not a value to most people. If we have enough people who have identified research methods as an area of focus, let's get those people sitting together because they have a common interest and they're paying attention to it and they're doing it already. The other way that you can develop program outcomes, and this does get to Marlene's course level issue, is that if you do have a well-developed set of course objectives, it's quite an interesting experience to put them all into one document and do a content analysis and develop your program outcomes from those course objectives. You can also do it based on other things as well. I've only done this once, but we had a department that was split into 2. One had a lot of students and a lot of service courses, and they went away, and what was left with a small group of 10 faculty who were only teaching really grad students, didn't really have a curriculum, had no idea what to do now, except they didn't want to go with the other people. That's all they knew. And so, I'm glad to hear that it's not only at Guelph these things happen. And so what we ended up doing was a research inventory of our faculty. Because in the ultimate, the research teaching link is critical. And so we actually started with the faculty's research and said, you're here as faculty, let's put together a curriculum that reflects what you do. We also did a bit of self-reflection, and it was one question that as a facilitator I asked in one of the retreats that seemed to trigger, and it wasn't a planned question, it was just one of those quirky things I didn't understand. As a facilitator, you can act naive and ask those questions that you wouldn't ask if you knew. And so in our university, we have a quirk where we have an economics department and an agricultural economics department. I don't know. And so this was with the agricultural economics department that they had split up and now they were a small group. And so we did the research inventory, and then when we were talking about the research, I just asked the innocent question of why do we have 2 departments? Why does agricultural economics sit outside of economics? And after some grumbling, we actually came up with a really good example, with a really good reason, and that was economics applied in agri-food, which is different from economics. And so applied in agri-food became the signature pedagogy of that program. And so the application in real world, in field courses, in assignments, that became the primary pedagogy for that program. So these reflective kinds of discussions are really important. And as a facilitator, you can have a big impact just by asking those naive questions. I mean, I'd been there for 10 years. I didn't know why. I always wanted to ask somebody. So I finally got a chance. And they finally thought about defining it. And that's what you can do as a facilitator as opposed to kind of going in and making those assumptions. Any other questions about the mapping? Yeah.
Naive question, maybe.
Good.
Who normally takes the lead in developing these 2 maps? Because they're quite powerful.
Yes.
Are they normally basically developed by curriculum committees or external champions, internal champions?
Fair enough. I think one of the things we need to put down here is this whole curriculum work does not work unless there's an internal champion. If there's someone in the department who cares and is willing to move it, it can work. If there is nobody interested, it cannot be driven from the outside. That's my experience. So actually, thanks for that. And that's often, curriculum committee chair, maybe the chair, a few random faculty. You don't need many. You just need someone internally to keep this going. In terms of resourcing it, the way that we do it through our center is we will run the focus groups. We will set up the survey. And if when we do this survey, by the way, we've done it in a number of different ways. We've done it one where we hire a grad student to walk around and talk to each faculty, record it, and then put it in the program. We've done it where everybody gets together at a retreat and does one together to make sure that there's common understanding of language. What does lecture mean? What do we mean by multimedia presentation? You know, once you start trying to get specific, people go, what is that? What do we mean by that? And so having a group of people, I find, is really the best, most advantageous. And then the third way, and the easiest way, if you have an engaged faculty, is just an online survey that they do themselves at their desk. Okay, so let me give you the mapping for this simulation. And my next question is, what do you do next? This will take a couple of minutes. Take a look at the results. Don't forget to take a look at the case study and the program outcomes and make sure we're matching. Here we go. Some maps for you. Oh, the orphan table. Sorry about that. Are there extras anywhere? Because I think we have some short. Thank you.
An extra?
Thank you. I think we have extra there. You can share. Oh, we have extra? Great. Thank you. There you go. Yes. That's the name of our software. Isn't that cute?
Common in British Columbia.
Buzz, come on back. I also just wanted to show you a different version of an intentions map. And this actually comes from the University of British Columbia. I'm doing a presentation next week at a symposium on learning outcomes in Ontario with our engineers. And so I just took one of the slides from there just to show you another way to do it. It doesn't, the levels of sophistication, you know, you can talk about Bloom, basic, intermediate, advanced. You can also do introduce, reinforce, master, novice, expert. You know, it's any of those. It's just trying to get this idea of what are the stepped levels. And in our survey, you can change all the language to reflect the language you want to. This is one done by UBC for engineering, and they did it manually for the 12 outcomes. And you can easily begin to see where the gaps are. You also might be able to identify where there's overemphasis, just from this exercise. It's a good question. I thought it was introduce, reinforce, and master, and now that I look at I, U, and E, I don't know. I think it's emphasis, introduce, understand, and emphasis. Something like that. But it's, again, usually a three-point elevation of sophistication. Can you see a lot of interesting discussions coming out of this? So in looking at the case study that you were looking at, what were some of the things you noticed from the mapping? You noticed something. What did you notice? You were talking about the level of sophistication piece.
Oh, on the second page, the one at the bottom with the levels, yeah, there's first year, one course, level 1. Second year, another course, still level 1. Third year, one course, it's jumped to level 3, and then in the last year, there are 2 courses, and they're again at level 3. So there's no course at level 2. So perhaps that second year course has to bump up the types of assessment as well. So it's analysis.
Really good observation. Yeah, that's exactly right. Now I have to say what exactly level 1 means to one prop versus the next may be nuanced different. So again, this gives us a general idea of the discussions that need to take place. We would then invite those faculty into a room together and go, what do you mean by introduce? And what do you mean by reinforce? And what do you mean by master? Or those 3 stages, because they actually may not be misaligned, just the understanding of where their course is, maybe. But it gives you the data And the group of people, basically whoever says, I focus on lifelong learning, they're kind of raising their hand and going, I'm interested. And that allows for follow-up, where you can get to a more detail. If we were to collect all the information we needed down to the course level objectives in the survey, nobody would finish it. It would take an hour and a half per survey. We figured 20 minutes is the max we can get of people's time to fill this out. So what we've done is gone to the level that takes about 20 minutes to half an hour per course, per faculty. Anything more than that we think is too detailed, because courses change and objectives change and faculty change, and also we just wouldn't get the engagement. So we drew the line where we drew it, and then we'll use this data to draw other people together in small groups to talk about those things. Yeah?
Question. Did you ever get faculty saying this is impinging on my academic freedom?
No, because we haven't talked about any courses, and we're asking them. We're not telling them, we're asking. What do you think your course focuses on? To me, it eliminates the academic freedom issue. Because we're not saying you must. We're asking you, what do you do? So that issue almost, and that's why we don't do top-down. That's exactly why we do it bottom-up. Yeah?
We were observing on the course progression map, the research methods courses.
Yeah, what did you notice about them?
There are 5 of them, and the 4 first ones are taught by another department.
Yes.
And the only time the environmental research, basically the actual discipline-specific, the program-specific faculty are involved is at the end.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. So there are some structural things there. Do they need that many outside disciplinary research courses? Where in their structure is their research course?
Well, there is no outcome about research in the program.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. That research one I showed you wasn't related to this case study. No, sorry. I was just an example. Thank you. Yes?
I wonder, and I may be getting ahead here, but if at some point you could address concerns that might be similar to the one that was just mentioned.
Yeah.
In terms of assessing the outcomes, concerns about homogeneity, concerns about assessing outcomes being used as a way to cut courses or cut programs or somehow censor professors, that kind of thing.
As a method of administrative efficiency, you mean? No. Yeah, absolutely. I think we have to be really careful about that. Any thoughts around how to? I think what we've tried to do is to do it from a faculty perspective. If I were doing a regular program evaluation and program review, which I've done for many years before coming into academia, we would consider all the stakeholders equal. I have to say that one of the changes we've made to the traditional program evaluation and development process is we have given more weight to faculty ownership because it's reflective of our culture. And I think that that's eliminated a lot of the issues. I also think there's a bit of a misunderstanding around program outcomes, that it becomes too restrictive. I don't see why you can't have a program outcome that says students will have exposure to or develop skills within a number of disciplines across, and then that becomes a requirement. So even if we say that we want students to self-explore, that is a totally appropriate outcome. So it's not only about transferable skills and employment and regulation and accountability. It's also about articulating what you want your program to be. And if you want your program to be exposure across a number of disciplines, that should be said and that should be encouraged, as opposed to being assumed. So I think it depends on what you think a program outcome can entail. When I think of a wide open curriculum, say our Bachelor of Arts, is pretty open and pretty free and meant philosophically for experiences. Not a lot of prerequisites, you have a lot of flexibility. I think that is a little bit more challenging around curriculum because you don't want to have as linked, as coordinated, as directly connected courses as you might in engineering. But I don't see why you can't say that we want students to be exposed to a number of disciplines, and then you build that into that program outcome. You know, you might still have writing. And so in an open curriculum where let's say writing becomes a critical skill, it's still one of the outcomes that we can identify as important for students in a BA. How that takes place might be different than it would in an engineering program. Well, we haven't gotten there yet, but what I can see evolving at Guelph is having writing-intensive courses that have additional grad student support, that have smaller classes than our traditional classes, so the other classes are going to have to give up something. And then students have to take X number. Doesn't matter which ones, doesn't matter which disciplines, but they can't avoid writing. So you can do things like that to not overly link, if you don't want to, curriculum and courses, but still understand what you want students and what students want to get out of it. You know, one of the outcomes that I just saw quite recently was that students will develop their own program outcomes and articulate how they will achieve it. That's an outcome. That's a wonderful outcome. So I think sometimes in some of our disciplines we just get a little worried about that accountability, you know, and I think it's really about articulating what you think your program should be or could be. And then providing opportunities to see whether you got there and whether students have gotten there. And so this gets to assessment. But before we get to assessment, let me just ask, what principles can we take away from the mapping and the discussion and your experiences to date? I have one that was talked about and it's come up a number of times already, and that's language. If you call it assessment in philosophy, they're going to walk away. If you call it something too qualitative, engineering is going to walk away. Language is really important. And so I do want to suggest that, you know, even someone had suggested in instructional methods and assessment methods, what a lecture looks like in one discipline can be different from what it looks like in another discipline. And so we developed that list of instructional methods and assessment methods directly with the curriculum committees in that discipline to reflect that language. Because the wrong word can really turn people off. So I just want to put down, you know, kind of common language or common nomenclature. Oh, no one's going to read that. I need it. Okay. Any other observations about the mapping? Okay, so let's keep going. So what we have is, we have a clear understanding of our context. We have a series of outcomes that have been agreed upon. And we begin to map what we intend for our students to learn and the structures in which we've placed them. The next question is, how do we know? All right, I'm on the wrong slideshow. Let me go back to the other one. Just give me a quick second here. And we're back. So the next question, and one that we're all anxious to get to, is how do we know whether our programs and our students are successful? So, let me just give you a little bit of background on this. Here's a framework I like to use. Program outcomes in the middle, instructional or learning methods, assessment methods, and the content. And at each level, what we're doing in the assessment is asking, is it effective? Is it efficient? And is it appropriate? And that's generally what we're doing. Even though that looks a little bit confusing, it can become a little bit more concrete when we talk about the kinds of things you might include in an assessment plan. So when we sit down with the department as a facilitator, after we've worked out the program outcomes, after we've done the mapping, and sometimes we'll do the assessment before the mapping, it's not always that sequential. There's flexibility in there depending on what the project is. But we will work out an assessment plan. And this is where multiple stakeholder engagement comes in. And so we might use student work. We might do 360 consultations with our stakeholders, figuring out who the stakeholders are. Is it employer? Is it alumni? Is it grad schools? Where do they go after? What are the experiences within? We obviously also look at accreditations and external reviews and previous reviews and any other documentation that might have existed, looking for benchmarks in your discipline or research and some of the literature or other programs that you're interested in. A critical part of this, which we're still getting to, is in the end, these outcomes are for our students. They're not for us. We need to set that up, and it feels like an administrative exercise at the moment. But in the end, if we forget that this is for students, that the students need to go out and be able to say, here's the things I can now do, know and value as a result of my program, that's tremendously valuable. Sometimes I think we don't pay enough attention to building student confidence about what they know, not just what they know. And I think this kind of reflective activities, and we're using, or we're beginning to use, program outcome-based e-portfolios, where at the beginning of the program, students are given an e-portfolio with their program outcomes set up, and instead of looking at their experiences course by course in those silos, they're now looking at it by outcomes and gathering artifacts and reflections from within courses, from without courses, from their own personal life that demonstrate the achievement of those outcomes. And in some capstone course, they're responsible for that. So that's where we're ideally going to. We're not there yet. But that's the kind of model that we're looking at. But you can even do that in smaller bits and pieces. A couple of examples I've already given is a writing assignment that students do in first year required intro course. Gets pulled out at the fourth year capstone course and they rewrite it and then tell us what changed. In the geography program, they took a first year book called The Top 10 Ideas in Geography, made it a fourth year book, had the students do presentations and debates and all that stuff, and the final capstone assignment was come up with the 11th top idea, your own. And so there are ways to build that in small bits and pieces, and then there's ways to do that in really big pieces. And then analytics. I put analytics at the bottom because we're not there yet. It's what's coming. We're actually going to be piloting within our learning management system starting this fall, whether we can, taking those intention maps and those courses and those assignments that faculty have said, those are the points at which students develop and we get evidence they're learning. We can pull those out and gather them together as one, and to see whether that gives us, using grades and using actual student input and mostly feedback, whether they're using that. I have some questions about whether we can do this well, so we're going to pilot it this fall and try it out on 2 programs. As a matter of fact, engineering and that Bachelor of Arts and Sciences, because they're so different philosophically, and we'll see where that goes. But I think thinking about where do grades fit into this? I have a bit of an issue with fitting grades into it, and that's why I'm a little uncomfortable with analytics, because even though we say a grade represents an individual student's work and therefore is mastery, it's not necessarily true, because try handing in a grade report with all A's or all F's. At some point someone will say, shouldn't there be some sort of normal curve in there? Shouldn't the average be some, I mean, at least in our school, that still exists at a whisper. Right? And so I'm not sure that those grades are truly indicative of that individual student learning or of that individual student learning compared to everyone else in the class. And so I've been reluctant to engage with that, but we're going to try. So I'm not sure how that'll turn out, but certainly considering where does faculty assessment of students' work come into this? Yeah.
But there might be other kinds of assessments like retention, right? So you can assess a program based on are you retaining the students, have you engaged them early, and are you keeping them all the way through? Or
Sure. And I think this is where our creativity comes in, is trying to figure out for those program outcomes, who do we ask, what do we ask, how do we ask, and why do we ask, and how often do we ask? I think that's exactly right. I don't want to limit I mean, I think there's almost an infinite number of things, but these are the primary ones that we're using right now, excluding this for the moment, but hoping to build that into. There's so much data in that LMS, our learning management system. There's so much richness in there. We have to figure out how to get it out meaningfully. So we're working on that with our learning management system, which is Desire to Learn. Yeah.
I was going to ask that whether you're using Desire to Learn.
No.
Because I've had some training on that myself, and I think it can achieve what you're.
I hope so.
My other question was, with the e-portfolios, I know what it looks like in Desire to Learn, because I have a sandbox to play in. They're giving faculty or program advisors access to those e-portfolios? So you're able to assess them?
Yep.
Okay. Because typically they can be private.
Yeah, no, but this would be set up as a different, not as an individual portfolio, but as a program portfolio. So we're pushing our LMS towards an outcomes approach as well, because most of the LMSs are course by course by course by course. And now all of us are thinking this way. And so we need to pressure our LMSs and our technologies to reflect that as well. We have a good relationship with Desire to Learn, so we're hoping to be that influencer. Yeah, and we were their first client. So yeah. So we're pretty close. Anyway, let me give you a little bit of a framework for thinking about developing an assessment plan, and then we'll do it with the case study that you have. Here's a really simple theoretical model to use. Donald Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of evaluation. If you think about these 4 levels when you're doing your assessment, you'll have a pretty well-rounded approach. Level 1, we do lots of. Did they like it? There's lots of evidence to suggest that people learn more when they enjoy the experience. Not critical, but certainly a variable. And usually we do that within the course. Level 2 is, did they learn what they needed to learn? And that's usually done within the course or soon after. Those are pretty traditional to us. What becomes a little less traditional is, did what they learn in that class make it out? And this gets to deep and surface learning as well. If it's a surface learning experience and they make it to the exam, likely they're not going to remember it. It won't have had lasting impact. So we're trying to measure the depth of their learning and whether that makes it out of the class. I like to think of all of the assignments and all of the tests and all of the case studies and all of the simulations are not necessarily about that particular content or that case or that situation. It's supposed to be representative of an approach as well. That when you give an essay, they may never remember the content of the essay, but hopefully they'll remember how to put together an essay and how to put together an argument and how to reference and resource and articulate. And that they can take with them regardless of the content. And so that's what we're asking about here. But it's also the content itself. So I'll give you an example I gave yesterday. It was the most blatant example of testing transfer I've seen on our campus. Prerequisite first year, students went through it, did the final exam, got their grades, went away on Christmas break, came back to the subsequent course, got the final test again, first day of class. And then but it wasn't graded, it wasn't recorded as a grade, but it was used as a way to measure what was lost in 3 weeks. The grades went down incredibly. 3 weeks. It's kind of striking when you think about that. Yeah. And so considering what are those ways that you'll know, one of the things that I've started to do in my own practice is I don't give out an assignment without including questions like, what did you learn? How are you going to use it? I don't grade it, but I won't correct their essay unless they submit that. Because that's the transfer. That's getting it out. And then finally, it's level 4, which is, did the students get did they achieve the program outcomes? Did they have endurance? And this is often done at an alumni survey well after graduation. Because we know that sometimes that learning needs to percolate. There's evidence to suggest that it takes about 10 years for the real value of a bachelor's degree to play itself out. That you still have to work at Starbucks. That you still have got to start. But within about 10 years, that's where the real advantage of the bachelor comes out over the college degree or the college diploma, which takes immediate impact, but loses its impact over time. Now that's based on income, that's based on earnings. So I don't think that's all. I wouldn't take that as as absolute, but it was an interesting look at based on income of college grads versus university grads. So I want to stop talking and give you a chance to work out an assessment plan. So for your case study now, you've got the context, you've got the outcomes, you've got some intention mapping and the structure mapping, and now you still want to know whether the curriculum works. So think about who are the stakeholders, what do you want to ask them, and how you're going to ask them. Focus groups, interviews, surveys, however else. So get out a piece of paper and take about 10 minutes and see what you can come up with. Oh, for a moment, I'm really sorry about the time crunch. Want something for me to learn about this workshop. But let me, I've given each of you an example of how we might do the assessment plan. And I've also, well, let's talk about the assessment plan. Did you take a look at the assessment plan that we provided, that I just provided to you? Not yet. I'll show you what it looks like. And even if it's not the one that you would have designed, that's okay. There are different ways to approach this. As you know, we talked about retention. There's all sorts of information that we could get out. But here's what we did for this particular program. We said we're going to do focus groups with current students every year. Here are the questions we're going to ask. We're going to do, in this particular case, a lot of the graduates work for themselves. So alumni and employers, in this case, were the same group. So we said we're going to run focus groups with them once every 2 years. And here are the questions we're going to ask. Then we're going to take a look at all those secondary documents, previous reports, accreditation, professional, other programs we like, and develop some reports. And we're only going to do that every 5 years. That doesn't need to be done every year. And then finally, we're going to have a faculty retreat every 2 years that focuses on curriculum development. So that there's a continuous effort around collecting the data and a continuous approach, but it's not overwhelmingly resource heavy. Once we've done all of these, what we'll typically do then is sit down with the curriculum committee with all of the raw data and develop typically a SWOT analysis. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I've given that to you there as well. And that's kind of an amalgam of the big messages. What we've done in the past is that we've collected all of the data except from faculty. And then the curriculum committee will put together a SWOT analysis. Very simple, and you can see an example of it right there. It's really, the messages really come popping out. Or the discrepancies in messages really come out in this process. And so the highlights really do seem to appear quite easily. What we'll do is we'll develop a SWOT assessment with all of the input except faculty. Then we will go to a faculty retreat. We'll make all the raw data of all of these data available to them in advance. Nobody reads it, but transparency is important. And then we will put the faculty in groups, and we will have them do their own SWOT of what their perceptions are of the program. And then we'll show the comparison. And then we have the SWOT from all the stakeholders and the SWOT from the faculty, and then we can determine some action. And that's the process that we typically use. That make sense? I know we're running through this really fast, and thank you for staying. And if you got to go, please go. I'll be finished in 2 minutes. But do you have any questions around the assessment and the development of assessment plan? Principles that I like to think about is that what we're trying to do is get away from an episodic, once every 7 years effort at this, and make it a continuous improvement process. And so built into this assessment plan is every year something. Doesn't have to be a lot. One pizza lunch focus group a semester with current or entering students to find out what they hope to get out of the program. And one or two focus group, pizza lunch focus groups with graduating students, end year students. It's not particularly onerous. You collect the information, you can even just put it away for now, knowing that you're collecting it every year, so you're getting a little bit every year. Yeah?
So we need ethics approval to do this?
No. No, you do not need ethics approval to do, in our university, you do not need ethics approval to do this unless you're going to publish. If this is for program improvement, it's all good. That's our understanding of it. That's how we work. But if it does involve any dissemination, then we do have to. But this is a big issue. It's a really big issue you bring up. You might want to engage with your ethics people to make sure that that doesn't become, that this is program improvement, not research.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, it is a slippery slope. And we do have to, we've had those discussions, and you may want to have those as well. It's a good point you bring up. Thank you for that. Do you want to see what happened as a result of this wonderful curriculum plan development? Do you get a sense of the whole picture? Program outcomes, what are we trying to do within it, and what are we actually accomplishing? It's that simple. Let me just give you, just so we close off this whole, where'd it go? Oh, there it is. What would happen next is you would sit down with the SWATs, and you would now come out with the curriculum committee with recommendations for action. And you're going to come out with a ton of things that you should improve. And the idea is pick one a year. Don't overwhelm with all the problems, or all the improvements. Rather, think about focusing on one priority until that's dealt with. And then remember to reassess it when you've had a chance to run it through now the program a few years. So all of these programs that we've been doing assessments on, it takes about 5 years, and then we go back and see what changed, the effect of the changes we made, and see if that problem is now gone or that opportunity has now been realized. Okay, so I'm going to give you the results from this particular case study and see whether they jibe with where you think you might have gone at the beginning. You can actually go back and later and assess them again and check that same data that we got that brought out the issue, and if it no longer appears, or if we can ask specifically about that, and we can know whether we've dealt with that, and then move on to the next priority. What we've done with this project that just took us a year in real time, now we'll found the next 5 or 6 years of program development for that department. Those 3 items, those 3 priorities could easily take the next 6, 7 years to grapple with. But if they do, it'll make the program much more successful. That's curriculum A to Z in a really kind of practical, hands-on, overly timed way. If you have any questions, I'm going to be around for a little while. My email is peter.wolf@uoguelph.ca. I know Gary Hunt and a lot of people are really interested in helping build the supports and build the resources. Did you want to say something?
I think, well, Ginny.
Ginny?
Everybody knows Ginny is the Provost Fellow for TTM Learning, and she chairs the committee that will drive this work, and I'm just sort of a member of the committee, but also oversee the center, which will provide the resources and support for this work at the direction of the advisory committee.
Look at them.
So
These are the people right here.
And there are many others involved.
Yeah.
The committee is already large, so I think that's important. And the other thing that I'd like to do, because I know that many of you have to go, not the least of whom is Peter, who has a plane to catch, is to ask you to join me in thanking Peter for a very enriching.
Nice. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Oh, that's very sweet. Thank you. And I'm happy to say I got myself a wolf cap. Wolf pack. My last name being Wolf, I had to get the wolf pack hat. So I'm very excited. Thank you very much. And you're in great shape. Good luck on this initiative. It's really worthwhile. I think you'll get a lot of benefit out of it. And have a lovely weekend and day and enjoy the sun.